Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm bringing you a special episode of the Bokeh Podcast today called Workflow Wednesday. During these special edition episodes, myself and my co-hosts will focus on helping you develop more efficient daily and weekly workflows around post-production, communication, task and project management, time management, file and image management, and yes, the list does go on. We're going to save you an incredible amount of time in your work week, and we promise not to be too nerdy. This podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. All right, cool. We are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Workflow Wednesday series. And I'm excited to have not only Rich here today, Haley and Heather are out for the day, but we have a longtime friend of ours and a new guest on the Workflow Wednesday series, Shaun Austin from KISS. Thank you so much, Shaun, for making time to hang out with us for a bit.
Sure thing.
And we were running into a few technical issues as we were getting started. So if you all are noticing audio or technical video issues as we go, don't hesitate to comment. We'll make adjustments on the fly, as we always do, the best that we possibly can. But this particular series, for those of you who are new to the show, is very much centered around the idea of workflow, and more specifically, efficient workflow. And we're starting yet another new series this week with Workflow Wednesday, which is centered around album sales. We're going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of album sales this week. And of course, it makes plenty of sense to have Shaun along for the ride for this one, to comment both on the philosophy. And then next week, actually, one of his team members as well will be joining us to talk about the actual workflow with a focus on efficiency. How do we manage this process of selling albums and delivering them to our clients as efficiently as possible? And we'll get to that next week. This week, we're talking about philosophy. And Sarah already chimed in and said, looking forward to today's conversation around album sales. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. And for those of you that are joining in, listening in, watching, don't hesitate. Well, actually, for those of you who are watching live, don't hesitate to comment, ask questions, make suggestions. Let us know what your experience has been in regards to album sales. And for those of you who are listening on the podcast, we push this out to the podcast later on today. You can always come back and take a look at the video version of this broadcast. If you go to facebook.com/photogsedit, PHOTOGS.
You do that every
every single time I get screwed up on that one. But you can come back and watch the videos, and that'll be particularly relevant next week. We're going to actually do a live demo of the KISS album interface, and so you're going to want to check that out as well. But
nice.
How have you guys been doing? We were kind of small talking a little bit before we got started here, but Shaun, what's just briefly, what's family life been like? It looked like you were traveling a little bit, and then talk to us a little bit about where KISS is at.
Sure. Yeah, the kids are on fall break right now. So I've been on the road a lot, kind of for KISS, and some personal travel's been in there as well. But yeah, we were able to get away for kind of a long weekend. They're off for the rest of this week. So I'll be home for the rest of this week and then headed out to New York for a photo show next week. But yeah, KISS has been, I'm a bit overwhelmed right now, to be totally honest, and trying to still live by my word of the year, authentic, and just really, we feel like we've scoped out what's next for KISS. We've done some surveying and things like that, and what's going to get us there is not maybe what got us here. And so looking into the future and technology and things like that, and really, I mean, my heart and the heart of KISS, which I was on a phone call with one of my developers today, and we talked at the end of the phone call. I was just so grateful to talk about why we're doing what we're doing. And ultimately, it's still like to serve the photographer. And a lot of the surveys that we get back are in this topic of like, I can't teach confidence in album sales. And so a lot of the feedback that we get is like, I'm not a good salesperson, or my clients can't afford it. And so those, what I see those as are limiting beliefs, and maybe they are true to some point, but I believe kind of like getting out there and trying it and understanding it a bit more, and marketing it in a specific way, and ultimately becoming a salesperson. It's like my biggest thing lately has been like, why do all my parents, all their friends, my grandparents and all their friends, all of them have albums. Like every house that you go into of kind of like generations before us, they all have books. And I think that's what photographers did for a living, is they, sold albums, and their camera was just a tool to get there. And because of film, we had to print. And so it wasn't as big of a jump to albums as it was from like a digital download to the book that we have now. But so we've been going through that and trying to figure out kind of like, we've scoped out tools that we want to build to help with that, and really trying to figure out the pace, the path, those types of things, and how we're going to do it. So it's definitely been a lot of flights, and just, I have a lot of relationships. That's what I do, kind of for KISS. A lot of relationships in the industry with photographers, with other companies, with potential people that we would build this with or for. And again, the photographer being the main goal that we're serving. KISS is just one of the pieces that this lines up with. So.
Well, and there's so many different talking points that you shared just now. I really love that. There may be a couple that I want to focus in on. One, you talked about that word authenticity or authentic. And this is it's honestly kind of a pop culture phenom right now. You hear this word thrown around a lot, but I'm sure it means different things to different people. What does it mean to you, and how does that translate to the brand?
Yeah, so to me, it just means being genuine. Like things, I can make a Facebook or Instagram life look like everything's perfect all the time. And that's just not the case. It's not relatable. And which I believe is what's caused a lot of like anxiety, depression, things like that, is like having to live up to this bar that is fake. And so I'm willing to share times that it's like, hey, things aren't so easy right now, or like I'm on the road a lot, so it's hard to connect at home, but my family and I are in this, and so I will, do what I can to make this happen, and put a deadline on it. And that's just part of business, whether you're a photographer or whatever type of business you're running. It's like, it's not easy, and you can hustle through it, but it's like, if I don't understand why I'm doing it, then I'll run ragged, and just be exhausted. I've been there in my photography business. I've been there with KISS. And so I'm a bit exhausted right now, but I'm excited for what's coming. And so authentic to me is just like real, like trying to be real and where I'm at, like today, like right now in this moment. And even if it's not like the pretty edited photo that's on Instagram, it will have some real life embedded in it.
Yeah, and I this is a good reminder even for me, because I have a tendency to very highly cull the content the personal content that I'm putting online. And I think for probably the very, very similar reason that a lot of people have, which is that the last thing that they want is to make a poor impression, or to make somebody think that they're struggling. You want to kind of to create this persona, this aura around you that you've got it figured out. And the reality at the end of the day is that probably none of us really have it figured out, if we're honest. And so I appreciate your willingness. I mean, I've noticed this consistently, particularly through your Instagram account as of late, where you're being very, very open and honest about the things that you're thinking about, the things that you're struggling with, the conversations that you're having with your wife, and you're willing to share that with the industry at large. And I do appreciate that authenticity. It is, I mean, that word sums it up very, very, very beautifully. There's the other side of this conversation, which is that a lot of times particularly in Facebook, you notice like as you're scrolling through a Facebook feed, that you see that some people have kind of gone the opposite direction, and that they're kind of consistently and constantly complaining and whining about this thing and that thing. And there isn't any kind of proactivity innate to the conversation, which is, hey, this is the struggle that I'm having, but then here are the things that I'm learning in this process. And then here's what I'm doing to address it. And it seems like you've got a pretty nice balance of both. You're constantly learning and constantly looking to improve. You're doing that on a personal level. You're doing that on a business level. You've been very open about how you're doing that in your relationship with your wife, Jamie. And I appreciate your willingness to share that with the industry.
Yeah, thanks. It really was just like a shift in perspective ultimately. And it's easy for me to become the victim. And there's times where I still do, like I race to that. And there was a book that I read in the last few months called The Obstacle is the Way. And it's just like the obstacle is ugly typically. And we want to kind of like skip down the path to the summit, and that's just not the case. Sometimes the the view or the payoff it takes a serious climb and a lot of obstacles as you go about that. So to create anything of value, I feel like looking at the obstacle more as just like an obstacle, and if that's the direction that we are going to go, we go through it. And so life will continue to have the things that it throws at us, and I can easily slip into that victim mentality. But I feel like you end up stuck. I end up stuck there, like just viewing it that way. And so it's like, yeah, sure, it's a tough thing, and there's a lot of growing opportunity in those situations, like you mentioned. So trying to learn and not miss out on much of the opportunity for growth in those situations, and really just trying to be as real, as well as like safe with the things that we do share. There's a certain limit that it kind of encroaches on privacy and things like that. I'm like, my wife has to kind of rein in on that a bit because I'm willing to share it all. And she's like, yeah, that's our life. So like, it's more of like an in-person conversation with people that we're working with or whatever, but she's committed to it as well. And I appreciate that. But yeah, thanks for noticing. And it's been quite the ride for sure.
Yeah, well, but just the fact that you're willing to share that ride is wonderful, and there is kind of this nice balance of here are the things that I'm loving and that I'm excited about, especially highlighting your family. And I love your emphasis on family, the important people in our lives. That's so much of what it's about at the end of the day. But I also appreciate the fact that you're sharing what you're learning through this process too, and that you put a little bit of effort into your posts. A lot of times we see these posts with a pretty picture and kind of the same group of about 10 words that are mixed in one form or another, one variation or another. Everybody is posting the same, kind of ultra happy, ultra excited. I'm so privileged to do this and this. And
hashtag blessed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate the fact that you're making more of an effort and really sharing from the heart. The other thing that you brought up, and by the way, just a little side note for those of you watching on the video, I'm seeing a little bit of delay, the audio and the video. And so I apologize if that's the case on your end. For those of you listening on just the audio side of things, that's not going to be an issue. So if this is too confusing for those of you watching in video, jump to the audio. We'll have the episode published on the podcast later on today by about 6 p.m. Eastern or so. But the other thing that you mentioned, Shaun, that I want to highlight, and then Rich, I want to go to you, is the ongoing effort that you were referring to that is trying to figure out, I mean, you see where KISS as a company has come. You guys have been around for over 10 years now, and you've had all kinds of success, but you're looking at what's next and trying to figure out what works best, not only for the company, but you talked about the significance of the client experience, or you alluded to that. And I love that. I was reminded yesterday in a conversation with a photographer, I think it was, they were highlighting the fact that it's easy to do what we want. I mean, especially as artist types, right? Much of what we do as photographers is kind of ego driven. And for that matter, as entrepreneurs, is ego driven. We have a particular thing in mind that we think is a great idea, and we pursue that for one reason or another. And at the end of the day, if we don't ask the honest question, take a step back and ask the honest question, is this actually what the client wants? And then adjust not only our efforts within the company itself, but ultimately our marketing efforts as well to accommodate what the client's actually looking for, not just simply what we want. We're going to fall short, or we may miss the mark or the potential, miss the opportunity to fulfill the potential that we have as a business owner and as a company, because we're not considering what the client is actually looking for, what they actually want at the end of the day. How have you found a balance between certainly living out your mission as a business owner and as a company, but then also making sure that at the end of the day, the service that you're offering, the product that you're offering, is a reflection of what the client is actually looking for as well? Because I think this is a very relevant conversation to all photography business owners.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. And I'll try and keep it short, but cut me off if you need to. When it comes down to it, I have this like broad purpose, and it's like relationships, conversations matter to me. And so you look at that in my family, and it's similar. But then you shift it into business, and it's like weddings and things like that we get to serve. And so service minded purpose as well is like been KISS's motto from the get go. So serving the photographer and ultimately their end client through our product, through our software, through our user interface is something that we talk about regularly. And so as long as there's, the photographers and their clients to serve, we will always have plenty of work to do. And so it's easy to get away from that, with like the next cool material, cover, paper, edit to put on a photo as well. But when it comes down to it, why we do it is that relationship and making it as easy as possible for there to be less barriers for them to get to what ours is as a product of the book. And so when we do that, we think through like, what does it take to get back to our clients? Because there's so many times business just takes us further away from our clients. And the way it's interesting. So a couple things. Thanks for the Feedback is a great book. And feedback is something I was not always great with. And I'm trying to get better and better at hearing feedback. But like ultimately our clients can build our company for us. And so we attach that to the why, and then we continue to do what we love to do. So getting feedback, helping them by serving them and educating them on what's working for our top clients and kind of like sharing that down. But getting back to that user experience and to our clients is huge for us, So Thanks for the Feedback is a great book for that. And then the other part was it was in a documentary called The Defiant Ones. It's Jimmy Iovine. It's Dr. Dre, I believe, is talking at this moment, but it's either him or Jimmy talking about the creative, and he talks about the artist. The further away from the art the creative gets, the less like beautiful their art is. So like you add business, or you add Dr. Dre specifically said, you give me a deadline and it nearly crushes me because it just sucks the creativity out of it. We have to deliver, and there's certain things we have to do from the business side. And so that's what Jimmy is constantly trying to do for the creatives, is keep them as close to the art as possible. And that's how they're able to create that beautiful thing that they focused on. For them, it was music. For us, it's photography. And so that's our goal with KISS, is to serve because of the relationship and because of the beautiful things that happen at weddings and in families and portraiture and things like that. The closer to the art we keep the photographer, I believe the better their business can be, but there still is that massive piece that we do is the business side, so we're trying to create tools and serve them in a way that we're creating an atmosphere that the business happens in order for them to thrive in their creativity and their art.
That's really, really good. Okay, so I'm taking notes as you were talking here. We'll make sure to link to.
That's brilliant. I mean, he just gave me a great excuse for my wife. Every time she gives me a deadline, I'll be like, I'm trying to stay close to the art. Exactly. You're stifling me. I feel stifled right now. I like it. Brilliant, Shaun. Brilliant.
Well, it really is good stuff. And I'll make sure to link to that book in the show notes for this episode. If you listen to the audio version of the podcast, make sure to go to Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com. And it's that site and the show notes associated with all these episodes that we put out is a wealth of information. We'll make sure to link to this book in the show notes as well. But as I was taking notes, there was two big ideas that came to mind to kind of sum up what you were saying, Shaun. One was the significance of communication. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're not on an ongoing basis having communication or having conversations with clients, with potential clients, to truly keep in touch with what it is that they're looking for, then we may come up with a cool product, we may come up with a cool service, but the reality is that it may be irrelevant to the actual needs and desires of the potential client. So staying in close contact with, I mean, in your case, you're almost working with two different clients, right? You've got the photographer, and then you also have the end client, the client that the photographer is serving. But that the need for constant and consistent communication, feedback being one form of communication, is so important. And I love that you highlight that. The other thing that you highlighted, which is really interesting, this has been kind of a theme on the podcast of late, is the significance of partnership. Mm-hmm. And a conversation also that I've mentioned on the podcast a number of times as of late it's a conversation that I had with a photographer friend of mine, Thomas Flint, on the Bokeh Podcast a little while back, last year around November or so. And one of the things that he highlighted was something that you alluded to, the significance of partnerships in the music industry. These well-known artists that we love to listen to and hear about and listen to the stories of, they didn't become what they became without partnerships, whether it was with individuals or labels or otherwise. And the reality is that this is very much the case in the photography industry too. So many of the photographers that we know and love or have read about in photography books or otherwise, they became what they became largely because of partnerships, whether it was somebody to help them in their post-production work, or it was somebody that helped market their brand, spread their brand to the world, or otherwise. Partnerships were a significant element of their rise to fame and the impact that they had on the photography world, the photography industry. So this idea of the significance of communication, but then also partnerships. And of course, KISS plays a really important role in these so-called partnerships with photographers, not only just in the production of the albums, and we're going to get into this more in detail next week when we talk about the workflow, but you guys offer a really great solution to the actual design process of the albums, which is something that inhibits photographers a lot of times in offering albums or proactively offering albums. They're thinking about the fact that they've got this album design and it's going to take hours and hours to get done. You guys have a really cool tool built into your site at kiss.us that enables the photographer to very quickly put together a design and then work with the client to get feedback before finalizing the design and having the album printed. And I mean, that partnership is invaluable, not only for the sake of printing the album, but also helping making the work and make the workflow more efficient. So I love that you highlight both of those points. These are really, really powerful points. And I appreciate you sharing. Rich, do you have something to kind of add to tag on to the end of that conversation, and then share just a little bit about what you've been experiencing, particularly in business as of late? I mean, we're hitting busy season, especially for wedding photographers. What's that been like for you?
Well, I mean, like when I listen to Shaun and I love, I mean, like everybody has this, like you said, it's a buzzword now, being authentic, whatever. So, but yeah, it's, my wife and I were actually discussing that this morning about just like this epidemic of comparing yourself to other people, and it normally is on social media, and I mean. There are people who are on medication now because they can't get their anxiety under control, and so it's the FOMO, like I'm going to miss out on something, this fear of missing out. It's very interesting. I think it's very interesting just to add that conversation that you were having is that it, to me, the what draws me most into social media is something that you can see that's real, like people sharing their fears or their emotions, but very few people actually do that. It seems like the stuff that gets the most attention, the most likes, the most comments, interactions are the ones that are truly authentically real. But people still really want to put their best side forward because we've been trained to do that from the very beginning of our lives. Like we leave the house. I got to make sure my hair gel is in. I got, my wife, we got to put makeup on. We want to present the best of ourselves to the world, even without social media. That's just been what we, been. But
and I guess that whole experience or that whole process has been just magnified to a 1,000%.
Oh yeah,
when we have such easy access to everyone's world now, and as we pointed out, they're highlighting the best of the best. And everything else kind of gets left out in the process. And so it is easy to compare, but that very comparison is, as you alluded to, Rich, what causes pretty significant anxiety. And, for those of you who don't pay a whole lot of attention to Gary Vaynerchuk, he's somebody that we've mentioned on the podcast a number of times before, but he talks about this very issue of comparison and how that can affect you as a business owner, and ultimately how it can inhibit your potential success, certainly as an individual, but also as a business owner. And I will link to a video or two in the show notes for this episode as well. You're going to want to take a look at that because I think you're going to find it quite inspirational. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. But Rich, what's your experience been as of late in kind of the middle of busy wedding season? What does that look like for you? Have you had great success? I'm always so impressed with the way that you engage with your clients. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's going great. To be real and to be authentic, it's hard. My wife she has reduced herself to actually, like bribing me to get work done because I'm so overwhelmed. I mean, like, even when we have good systems in place, it can get to the point where like you are just overwhelmed with work, and having people like surrounding yourself and I mean, we outsource our editing. We even through that, I can't imagine what my life would look like if we didn't have trying to surround ourselves with people who are trying to help us with the busyness of life, so we can concentrate more on our family and what the things that matter. So, but yeah, it's overwhelming right now. But it's we had to be more. We want to be more purposeful in doing family stuff, and so like even just yesterday, I'm overwhelmed with work, but we still spent a lot of time with the family. Kid has no idea, because that's what's important. You got to schedule what's important first, and then schedule everything else around that. So family time's important. That goes first on the calendar, and then we can be stressed about answering emails or whatnot afterwards, but right
after
now,
the fact,
after the fact. But I mean, but again, it always goes back to the fact, to me, is like this time in my kid's life, I don't get back. I don't get back. So I remember my dad working a whole lot, and I don't have many memories of us spending time together as father and son. He never went outside and played ball with me or took me fishing or whatnot. He was always working, and so I don't, and that kind of affected me. I don't want my kids to experience the same thing for me. And every time I feel like I'm slipping into that being working so much and ignoring my kids, there's that little voice that kind of reminds me, hey, let's fight against being that portion of your dad. My dad's a great guy, but that aspect of his life, he needed to work on. He really didn't, so.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to look back to, and it's easy to kind of get stuck there. But I love that you're taking that experience, and we spoke earlier about the significance of, certainly we can be honest about the negative experiences that we've had in life, but then highlighting what we learned from those experiences, and then how we're proactively moving forward, what we're doing as a result of the lessons that we learned from those experiences. And I love that you're doing that proactively. And I mean, the other thing too that you mentioned a second ago, and that I will highlight as well, again, is the significance, the idea that Shaun alluded to earlier, the significance of partnerships. Partnerships, without these kinds of partnerships where we have a company to outsource editing work, which is one of the most time-consuming elements of running a photography business. We have a company like KISS to outsource not only album design too. I mean, you can take advantage of the album designer, but you can also have them just do the design work for you, so you don't even have to think about it. Taking advantage of those types of partnerships, taking advantage of partnerships with accountants, or other admin assistants that can help you with communication, email management, managing the calendar, and booking clients and so forth. There's so many opportunities to partner with other people. And one of the things that I've mentioned before a number of times at this stage is that if you were to very quickly make a list, or not even quickly, I mean, take an hour for that matter, and sit down, make a list of all the things that you have to do in a day, and then tag each of those items, either proactive or reactive, proactive being those tasks or activities that actually grow your business, increase your bottom line. And then those reactive tasks being those things that have to happen in order for your business to exist, but don't necessarily require your involvement and probably can't connect it directly or correlate it directly to increasing your bottom line. Those items on that list of how you spend your day, literally from the time that you get up to the time you go to bed, that you tag reactive in nature. If you do a quick Google search of each of those items, you'll likely find a service or a business of some kind that will take care of that particular activity for you so that you don't have to. And then any activity that you can't delegate, you can probably either automate it or potentially simplify it so you don't have to spend as much time in it. But it's easy, especially during these busy months, to get overwhelmed in the process of managing a photography business, servicing so many different clients, shooting weddings, potentially up late nights at times, shooting, and you have long weekends, potentially with multiple weddings or 10, 15 portrait sessions in a week. It becomes overwhelming. capitalizing on those partnerships is absolutely vital. And I'm glad that you highlight that, Rich. And speaking of, let's kind of go ahead and get into our topic. We've got about 30 minutes here for this week, which is, again, the beginning of the two-part series really on album sales. And I want to talk just a little bit about philosophy, because I think it's important, just as we were discussing today, to understand the psychology that drives this thing called album sales to begin with. Why does it even matter to begin with? And what are the helpful or beneficial value add thought processes that we should embrace as photography business owners when it comes to approaching album sales, not only so that we can sell more, but so that we can do so efficiently? Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to start with, and I'm going to go back to you, Shaun, is, and this is almost a rhetorical question, I realize, but I want to at least highlight it. In this day and age where digital photography means that our clients can very easily access a digital thumbnail or a gallery of thumbnails for that matter, share them to Facebook, download them to their phone, easily view them, send a text message to friends or family members. In an age where we have easy access to digital imagery, why does something like an album actually matter? And maybe to build on that idea and kind of what I was talking about earlier, is this something that we're trying to create a need for as photographers, or is there an actual felt need or desire from our clients that we should be meeting by providing a physical album? I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, Shaun.
Yeah. It's an interesting time for sure. The pace of life is faster than ever before, and the moments that we get to just stop are few and far between. You know, we don't end up finding rest at the end of the day. We end up crashing a lot of times at the end of the day because our bodies are actually exhausted, and so we fall into bed or fall asleep right where we're at. And that's not really rest. That's not recharging. That is crashing. And so I love the way that Dave Ramsey, financial expert, he has his radio show and things like that. The way he compares the physical touch to like paying with cash versus paying with a credit card. I would love to see somebody do some research on us looking at images on devices, which are beautiful, and it is easy to share, and Instagram is great. You know, we feel connected to everybody, and in actuality, we're probably connected to less than ever before. But like, it is a great thing. And it's like, I have family 2,000 miles away. So when I post stuff, I think about them. They get to see my life and my kids and the things that I have going on here in Indiana, and they're in California. But there's nothing quite like sitting down and flipping through an album, or flipping through 4x6 images of even my childhood or something like that. You know, I've said this before, but like I have spent some time with my grandpa in the last couple of years, and he has dementia. But when he's surrounded by photos a lot of the time. And when he talks about a photo, it's kind of like we call it a Rain Man moment. He knows everything about the photo, and he can tell you everything about it, yet he can't remember somebody's name in the room, you know. And then but you put a device in his hand, and he feels lost, you know, maybe because of his age or technology or whatever. But he sees devices as something else. The same thing with like my 9-year-old son. You put a device in his hand, and I can show him photos, but he wants to like play a game or something like that, or FaceTime with somebody. But you put a picture in his hand, and you sit with him on the couch, and it's like that moment is so different. We get to talk about it. He wants to hear the story behind it. If he's not in the photo, and it's about me, he wants to hear about it. If he's in the photo, he wants me to tell him about that time of his life. And it just stops us. And so as photographers, I don't believe we're creating like an excuse to have something printed. It's more like, how do you want your images? You know, how do you see your images first and foremost? What are you doing as a photographer? What is the purpose of it all? Sure, we stop time in order for us to reflect back on it. But where do you want that story really to lie? And so the way I would always do album sales was like, here's an album credit for X amount of spreads, which is more like a highlight reel of your wedding. And so here is an affordable way to get an album into that package. But what I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you how I saw the day in the full story length. So do you want to upgrade now even to that full story with a full album? Or do you want to keep it a highlight reel to keep it affordable so you can look back on it and you have something printed? And so that is how I always saw it, and how I sold it. Is like, I'm here to be like this storyteller, through the camera as a tool. I want to tell your story so you can reflect back on it. And when you print it and you put it in a book, that is how I wanted it to be delivered. Sure, I utilize screens when I turn digital and things like that. It's one of the ways I sold a ton of weddings was showing a slideshow at the reception that turned into like an iPad at the reception. And as technology evolved, I utilized it for things because it was like an easy way for me to show them images instantly. But the long term sitting on a couch with a glass of wine or a bourbon or a coffee or something like that and having a conversation over your story, I want that to be in a book. And so that is how I sold it when I was a photographer, and how currently our top clients are still doing it that way. They are photographers. They use photography as a tool to create this story with their clients, and for them to relive that's up to you. How do you want them viewing that? Is it on Facebook? I think that's a great tool. But for me and for a lot of my top clients at KISS, they do that through the physical album.
And you really beautifully summed that up. I think, again, I'm thinking very simply here, but a word that comes to mind is experience.
Mm-hmm.
That the experience is significantly different when you have something tangible in your hands. And, we are, you alluded to the fact that we are in this digital age where something like Instagram is really great, but there is an interesting behavior innate to Instagram, which is this very quick scrolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized, I had a conversation with my son that I've talked about before. I talked about something that I had posted on Instagram. I noticed that he had liked it. And so I asked him about the individual post. And long story short, what he told me or explained to me was that he had liked the image just because it was from me, and he was just being nice and kind of engaging with my post on a very brief level. The reality was he didn't actually know what that post was about. He hasn't taken the time to actually read the text that went with that image. It was just a very quick like and moving on. And that is the behavior that I'm guilty of it too, that so many of us exemplify in the social media age, in this digital culture. And it's a very quick something in passing, and we're on to the next thing that might capture our attention for a few more seconds, and then we're on to the next thing. And what that tangible physical album gives us is a completely different experience, which doesn't enable us or allow us to quickly scroll. We have a page to open up to, and we're taking our time looking at that image. And I know that, like, if somebody were to hand me an album, I'm just naturally going to, out of respect for these people, I'm going to take more time to look at that album and take it from page to page and look at the image, and then how that image may relate to the other images, and see how this grouping of images is telling the story, and then ask questions about those images that I'm seeing there, whether internally or to the person in front of me. But it's a vastly different experience when you have a physical, tangible project or product to look at, to hold, to touch. And I think it's a beautiful example too. And that story of your grandfather, it very accurately represents the different experience that we can provide our clients by offering a physical product like an album. Rich, I'd love for you to comment on this before we talk a little bit more about kind of how this idea of selling an album relates to time management and efficient workflow. But what's your experience been like offering a physical product to your clients?
I put the fear of God in them, actually. Basically, I tell real stories. This literally happened to me in my photography business. Literally one happened just this week, where about 6 or 7 years ago, I photographed our family doctor's wedding. She got married, and I photographed her wedding. Back then, 6, 7 years ago, I didn't really push album sales, and so she just got the digital files. Skipped to literally this week. My wife is having some health problems, and so we really liked going to this doctor, and so we contacted her. She's no longer at that practice. She does like a more of a personal private practice, and she basically said she told my wife, she said, maybe we can barter. I can't find my wedding photos at all, and she's like, hey, maybe we can do some sort of bartering here. And so to me, I'm like, that was just 6, 7 years ago, not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago. Like and literally she just got the digital files. maybe her hard drive crashed, her life got busy. Like she literally she can't find them. She can't find the digital files. I could be out of business. I could be dead. Like those memories could be completely lost if obviously I didn't keep really good backups of my work. And so she is still in danger of losing those memories forever. JPEG files just does not survive the test of time. It just will not. In fact, I even tell them right now, Apple does not store images on the iPhone anymore in JPEG file. They've gone to another format. I said you can't. I tell my clients you can upgrade to get like a USB from me. But it's like, if I hand you this USB today, you will not be able to fit this USB into my computer right now. Like it's just like technology is moving so fast. And these JPEG files, you may not even know what to do with these JPEG files in 5 years, 10 years. You just don't know, and so the only thing that will survive is a physical product and a book. So basically, I kind of go about that way. Basically, like, hey, I'm kind of giving you I'm not doing this for me. I'm not trying to do it for myself. I'm doing it for you, for their good, not my good. If they want to have something to show their kids, eventually their grandkids, it's not going to be on an iPad or a JPEG file. It's going to be a physical book. So images from a wedding, I mean, it hopefully survive for generations. And the only thing about that is through a physical album. So basically, I kind of walk them through, like, hey, think long term, through this, not just, hey, I want something to put on Facebook. I want you to think 25, 50 years in the future. Like, what do you want from these images?
That's really good. And just as a little side note here, we're having ongoing technical issues with the host platform today. And so I apologize for those of you who are trying to watch. I know it's a little sketchy. We actually lost Shaun, and hopefully we'll be able to bring him back here soon. But I know that the image is pixelated and the audio is delayed from the video. We're actually planning on moving to a different platform starting next week. So hopefully all these issues will at least largely go away. You can never fully rely on technology, speaking of.
Exactly.
But I apologize for the issue. And if it's easier to listen to the audio version after the fact, again, we'll have this episode posted later this evening. If you could just go to bokehpodcast.com, not only can you listen to the episode, link to various podcast players, but also see the show notes. But I was also taking notes, Rich, as you were talking, and you made some interesting points here that I want to highlight. Number one is the value felt when you have a physical product. I think there is a tendency, and I alluded to this idea earlier of, being in an Instagram age where we're scrolling very quickly, in addition to not paying very much attention to what we're looking at, there is also a tendency, I think, there's a felt minimalization of the value of that thing that we're observing. If we have a heavy, physical, beautiful product that we're holding in front of us, the amount of attention, A, that we're going to give to that, but then B, the amount of value that we're going to assign to that thing is significantly different than if we just have this image that in some ways feels no different than, a snapshot that our mom sent to us yesterday, because we can access it in the same way. So the kind of the association of value to that object is different when we have that particular experience. Secondly, the other issue, or not the other issue, but the other significant point that you made, Rich, that I think was really, really important, is the significance of longevity of a physical, tangible product. And that is because of the thing that you pointed out, which is technology. I mean, technology, as we can see, is not reliable. And to that point, if we have a physical product that is archival in nature, and a product like that from KISS is certainly going to be archival in nature, then the likelihood that we have that very product that we can go pull off a shelf and take a look at, or share with our friends, or share with our family, that we have that into the distant future is highly, highly likely. Whereas if we're dealing with something like technology, which, number one, can fail, but also is going to evolve, as you pointed out, Rich, there's less a likelihood that we're going to have easy access to that particular product, in this case, the digital files. And as a result, we miss out on the opportunity not only to enjoy them ourselves, but also to allow others to enjoy those images, that imagery with us. And so I love that you bring up those 2 points. Now, we're seeing the obvious value here of the physical, tangible album.
And actually even a professional album too, because I mean, like my clients do have the ability to go use my images on a Shutterfly book or a Blur book. You know, I kind of talk about that as well. Like, hey, again, like a blurb, a book that's printed as cheaply as possible. You spent a whole lot of money on me. These images. It's like taking a Ruth Chris steak and like putting it into a Happy Meal box. Like it just doesn't fit. You know what I'm saying? And so I basically kind of talk to them even just about the value of valuing their wedding images to put it into a good a quality book that will last because again, a Shutterfly book is going to fall apart in 5 or so years, or because it's so cheaply made. And it's not something that you're going to really be proud of and show your kids or grandkids later on in a really thin, book that's falling apart. The images are faded, So I even talked to them about that, to get a something that a good quality, heavy, archival legacy album that's going to survive for generations, because that's exactly what it is. That's what that's exactly what it's designed for.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you highlight that, because there is a significant range. I should say a significant difference between the range of products available. Certainly, you can go spend $100 at Shutterfly and get an album, or even less, probably.
Oh yeah,
get an album of images. But the reality is, at the end of the day, the quality of an album from Shutterfly versus something that you're going to get from a company like Kiss is significantly different. And it's not only felt, but that will be seen in the long run when it comes to, again, this idea of longevity, the quality of the product, and longevity of the product because of its quality. Yeah. And so I love that you highlight that. We lost Shaun, unfortunately, so we're just going to keep going here. And again, I apologize for the technical issues here. Certainly not Shaun's fault. I'm not sure what's happening with this platform today, but I'm glad to be moving on next week. And we're certainly going to get Kiss involved in the conversation again next week. And I really, truly appreciate Shaun's contribution to the conversation. But Rich, maybe you could just briefly comment. And again, this may be a little bit rhetorical in nature, but when we're considering pain points, and I think you even alluded to this to me, maybe off air at some point, but when you were talking about the reason or reasons why you haven't necessarily always proactively offered albums, you mentioned at least one, maybe a couple of different pain points that were apprehensions for you, reasons why you're not readily offering albums all the time. What would the most time-consuming elements or the biggest pain points of offering an album be, at least from your perspective as a wedding photographer who's been in business now for, what is it, 8 years, or is it 10 years?
10 years. It's been over 10 years
now.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
So I mean, like any kind of system, I am by nature a lazy person, which is not a bad thing. That's what I tell myself, at least. But anything that is going to make the systems or my workflow hard on me, is time consuming, something that is not enjoyable for me, that's hard to use, it's going to not make me want to do it. Therefore, if for example, if the album design process is a painful pain point for me, then I'm going to try to get my clients not to get an album, because I don't want to deal with it. So the whole ability to communicate clearly with my clients through the whole album design process. That was a pain point 5, 6, 7 years ago, where there was no good solutions out there for that, and so you could, it's the whole idea of, I used to design albums in Photoshop, Photoshop was not designed to be a book designing thing. Then I upgraded to InDesign, Adobe InDesign, but that is like I'm not a professional magazine. It was way too much. It's just way too much for the learning curve. It just, and then once I get the design done, how do I upload to Dropbox, and like how do I get them to communicate like what changes it was just insanely difficult, and so, but now it's a whole, all those pain points are gone, completely gone. Yeah.
And we're going to highlight kind of the solution via KISS. And next week, we're going to highlight the solutions to those pain points, because I think they've done a wonderful job of addressing those pain points. The thing that you highlight, Rich, which is really interesting. And by the way, we have Shaun back with us, so it's good to have you back, Shaun. Thanks. And I want you to comment on this here in just a second. But the point that you highlight there, Rich, is the significance of, or the significant role that complication or complicated workflows play in the process of doing something like offering an album. And I think this is a really important point to make. I mean, we talk about the significance of simplicity and efficiency in our workflow as photography business owners quite a bit here on the podcast. And the reason for that is, I've said so many times before, if you have too many moving parts that are irrelevant to the actual task at hand, or to ultimately to the business, the mission of your business at hand, it's just getting in the way of you being able to A, get things done quickly and efficiently, but then of course B, get on to much more important things in your personal life and in your business for that matter. Yep. And so figuring out ways to make that workflow more efficient, minimizing the number of unnecessary moving parts, is something that KISS has done beautifully. And I mean, in full disclosure, if you will, I've been friends with Shaun for years now, and I've been essentially following the progress of KISS as a brand since the very, very beginning. We actually started Photographers Edit at about the same time. Yep. And but what I've seen them do to minimize the potential barrier to entry when it comes to offering albums as part of the product line as a photography business owner is just incredible. And of course, the idea of their name itself is centered around keeping things simple. So again, we're going to highlight that workflow next week more specifically. But Shaun, just very briefly, I mean, you shot weddings for over a decade, right?
15 years, yep.
15 years. So your experience, and again, this may be a little bit rhetorical in nature, but just to highlight the significance of these potential pain points that our listeners or our viewers may have experienced themselves, what are the biggest pain points, or what were the biggest pain points for you as a photographer when it came to offering albums?
Yeah, very similar to Rich. I love how you said to communicate clearly is how you said it. And as a creative, that is one of the hardest things for us to do, is to communicate clearly what we're trying to say. And so the systems that you did, I went through the same exact thing. I did Photoshop, and Photoshop is made to edit photos. And that has, it's a really in-depth version of like a Lightroom or something, Aperture or something like that. And so there's tools that keep coming out that help us do what we do as creatives, but to communicate that clearly is hard. And then when you do an album design and how to communicate back and forth with, you take us back, 6-7 years ago, there wasn't systems out there for that. And so it was like, I used email, and then I'm trying to track, I shot over 60 weddings a year. So I'm trying to track through email, through Dropbox, through, having them in person, which just sucked. That was not what the relationship was built for, or the investment that I wanted to make. Around the album, it was just so difficult to get what they wanted, or their version of the story designed in an album, And so that's really why we built KISS, was to help, again, make a tool to help the photographer communicate what they're trying to, how they're trying to tell the story through photos. Because the way a photographer wants to communicate is like, I'm going to take your picture and then I'm going to show it to you. And that is a way that we're communicating. That is a clear communication for us. Like, here, this is you guys in this photo. So we try and invest in that relationship, create a moment to where it's like the camera's not around and I'm actually capturing raw emotion. Those are the most beautiful photos that there are. Somebody genuinely laughing, or somebody a couple wrapped up on each other, just like in the moment. Those are the shots. And so I can sit there and communicate, click, 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 click. And now with digital, I can show you the back of my camera or a film, you get it printed. I can show you that. That is a clear communication of what I'm trying to do as a photographer, is to document and stop time of raw emotions. Those are the hit it out of the park photos. And so now we're trying to do that by getting them a full story, and to do that with technology was something that we were willing to kind of like step up to the plate and do, and so that's what we've done with KISS, which we'll go over next week. But I think communication is so key, and being able to clearly set expectations. The things that we've run into over and over with photographers is expectations, boundaries, things like that. You were talking about, like, I was on the whole time. I could hear you guys. I just couldn't talk. And so I was just sitting there listening, and then you guys told me I wasn't on. But one of the things I thought was great was, like, you give them the images, and for them to maybe potentially go and design their own book. Between 70 and 80% of books that get started in the consumer world do not get finished. So a consumer starts a design, whether it's their family photos or weddings, because a lot of people are shooting and giving the images away. They're just not getting done. And so if they get it done, that is a huge thing. If they even start it, there was a company back in the day where we used to do discs, which was not that long ago. Our storage was done on CD, and then DVD was like, oh wow, there's like now so much more storage on a DVD, but there was a company back in the day that used to do that for a service. They would burn the images and send them to your clients for them. Well, for 6 months, their burner was not working. They had these stacks of burners, and in those 6 months, which they served a lot of photographers, I won't tell you who it was, but they served a lot of photographers. So in 6 months, they had 2 complaints. So that means 2 people out of the thousands and thousands of discs that they sent out even put it in their computer and tried to get to them. So I think as photographers, we need to serve our clients to the end and do something. Because I get why clients would maybe want those images. They want to like put them in a safe or keep them safe or whatever. I totally get that. But for us to ask them to go finish, to do a design. I mean, design is hard for a professional photographer to do. We're good at taking pictures and editing them and creating those moments, but then we have to become a designer. InDesign was the right tool to be doing it, but yeah, it was built for layout for magazine and things like that. So for us to do that is just difficult. There's people that focus on it, and that's all they do is album design, because it is an art in and of itself. But like, we need to take them to the finish line ultimately. And so KISS, that's what we're really trying to do, is create tools to help communicate clearly what we want their story to look like, be able to communicate back and forth, get them to the finish line. But even just getting them to the album is the epidemic nowadays. It's like, let me just take your pictures and I'll just give them to you and you guys go figure it out. I understand that concept. A, we're leaving a lot of money on the table, and B, we're really not taking our clients to the finish line. What do you want to do as a photographer? Where do you want your images to live for the rest of that person's life and past? Legacy is one of the things that we want to leave behind. And there's other, I can bore you to death with statistics, but it's an epidemic that there's photos out. There's more photos that exist in the cloud than do in printed form. We're coming up to that time, and this company Kodak Eastman, they do statistics on printed format stuff. They say people are now losing generations of existence in photo form because a phone ends up in a toilet or a hard drive goes bad. That's everything gone, because they haven't printed anything. Because now there's more cameras than ever before. And so we can take pictures of everything on the planet, but we're just not printing it. It's the pace of life doesn't allow us to stop and actually print anything. So as a professional photographer, what are they hiring us to do? And where do we want that format to live, or what format do we want that to live in? Where do we want their story to be told for generations to come? And so that's really what we're trying to fill in and work with photographers that care a lot about that and help fill in the communication that you referred to, the sales thing that is like a scary word, but really taking them to the finish line. What if that's what they expected from the get-go was an album? It's like you're more of an album salesperson than you use a camera to do that. You document their day, you edit with these tools. It's all getting us to that story and how it's being told. And for us, that's the book. I happen to own a book company, but it's like I care so much about the relationships and the things and the conversations that are going to happen over that book. That was my favorite thing about being a photographer, is when I handed in their book for the first time. I would do these little get-togethers where I'd invite the couple, the bridal party, and the parents, and they would all come to my studio, or I'd go to their house when I didn't have a studio, and we would do an unveiling of their book. And when I gave it to them for the first time, they would flip through it, and their tears and laughter, and people would crowd in on this couch, and I was like, this is why I do it. I have the chills right now. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm like, this is why I do it, because this is not the only time this is going to happen. They're going to be, they're going to have their kids, and they'll be over for Thanksgiving or whatever it is, and they will pile up around this book, and they will relive that day that we photographed together. And it is a beautiful thing, But that took a lot of work for us to get there. So it's so valuable to have that piece that lives on for generations to come. I mean, I'm super passionate about that.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate the very eloquent way that you summed that up. And I mean, you highlighted the two primary pain points in this process, which is the design and how much of a struggle that can be. And it is hilarious to think about some of the tools that we've used over the years to design albums with. But you guys have a really great system that we're going to share next week that enables photographers, if they want to do their own design, to do so very, very, very quickly. If not, of course, they have the wonderful option to be able to then delegate or outsource that design process to KISS, which is really cool. And we'll talk about that as well as the actual sales process next week. The other thing that you highlighted too is the significance of communication with our clients. I mean, that's not only important, as we said at the very beginning of today's episode, for the sake of understanding what our clients are looking for, what they want, what they need, and then as a result, providing a better service and product to them. But in this process of designing something that is going to be a legacy item in their family, communication is so important. And so having the right tools in place to enable that effective communication is really important. Again, you guys have created something like that for photographers to use, and we will highlight that again next week. I really appreciate you making time, Shaun, to share with us today. I know that things are crazy busy for you. The same goes for you, Rich. I appreciate you both being here, making time for the Bokeh Podcast, for this Facebook Live series, Workflow Wednesday. Latoya Dixon-Smith says hello. She's waving hello. I actually just did an interview with Latoya yesterday, and she is a workflow specialist. Her episode is going to be coming out here pretty soon, so make sure you be on the lookout for that. We may actually have Latoya on the Workflow Wednesday series in the near future as well to talk about workflow and systems, the significance of systems. But thanks for listening in, Latoya. Thank you for those of you who have watched today, who have chimed in. And then for those of you who are also listening to the audio version of the podcast. And if you are listening to the audio version, make sure you go to Bokeh Podcast, BOKEH podcast.com, and check out the show notes. I'll link to some of the resources that we mentioned today. And you want to look at some of the other show notes associated with the other episodes, including actually episodes that I've done with both Rich and Heather individually, and then with Shaun as well. You could just do a quick search and you'll find those as well. But thank you guys so much. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we'll chat with you more soon.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.